cattle it would take to feed 1,000 men for a week. Any idea? Well, they operated a grist mill from dawn till dusk every day to make enough meal to feed these men, and about 5 or 6 cattle a day were slaughtered in order to feed these 1,000 men. So it took an enormous amount of food. It took an enormous amount of forage also for their collected animals that were there for the officers and also to draw their wagons. It took a great amount of land to house all these people, to give them a place to stay while they were drilling. Colonel Maxey noted that no pains have been taken to drill and discipline the regiment, which on both will compare favorably with any in the service at this time. He wrote that shortly after the organization in December of 1861. On January the 1st of 1862, the regiment received orders to proceed overland to Memphis. At that time, when you were organizing the state of Texas, you either went from where you were organized to Houston to be disembarked on steamships to New Orleans, or from Galveston to New Orleans, and then on to Virginia, which is how Hood's Texas Brigade finally arrived in Virginia. Maxey's regiment, however, marched overland from Fannin County through Lamar County, and then over through Arkansas to Memphis, where they arrived on January the 25th. On January 25th, Colonel Maxey noted that the health of the command in consequence of the long winter's march has not improved since the last report. At this time, measles and pneumonia had killed between 80 and 100 men in the 9th Texas. Before the first bullet was fired, before many of these men ever had a weapon in their possession, about 80 to 100 were already dead. And a like number had been sent home because of their illnesses and would either not recover or would recover later and re-enlist in another command. By February 18, 1862, the regiment arrived at Iuka, Mississippi. Iuka was a general staging point for Confederate soldiers coming into the area, and at this time there were thousands upon thousands of soldiers pouring into this area. You can imagine the sanitary conditions as well as the logistics of feeding and finding room for all these people. It was a problem that persisted in the Confederate Army from when they first organized till the final shots were fired, how to take care of so many men on such a small amount of space. On the previous day, February 17th, Lieutenant Colonel William Beeson noted that they had received 788 knapsacks for the men, 500 haversacks, and 450 canteens. I brought a good copy here tonight of a Confederate knapsack that a friend of mine in Waco made. 788 of these distributed to the men, so that's a bunch. That would take a lot of wagons just to bring these haversacks or these knapsacks to the regiment. 500 haversacks. A Confederate soldier, many of you that have done any reenacting at all, you know the worth of your haversack. In your haversack, you'd keep many of your, not just your food items, but also your personal items. And I've attached my tin cup here to my haversack. I've got my plate, my knife, fork, and spoon set in here. I've got a hand towel. I've got a Bible. I've got a songbook. All my personal items I keep in my haversack. Extra pair of socks in order to have them ready if you need them. So this is your haversack. At Iuka, the men became engaged in building their winter quarters and drilling and also flooring the new commissary, which none of these things would be of any value because shortly thereafter they'd be picked up and moved to Corinth, Mississippi. Well, on March 4th, Colonel Maxey leaves the regiment. Colonel Maxey had received his training at West Point, United States Military Academy, and he had trained there with several illustrious men who later went on to high Civil War command. Among some of the men that he knew at West Point, we know that he roomed at least 1 year with Thomas Jonathan Jackson, who most of us know as Stonewall. We also know that he formed an attachment there with Ulysses S. Grant, that he would have the rest of his life. We know that without General Grant, Colonel Maxey, later General Maxey, could never have received his amnesty in order to serve in the United States Senate. Excuse me. So we know he formed many long-lasting relationships. Does anybody know how Maxey finished up at West Point? What his ranking was? Who said that? Next to last? Does anybody know who was last?
Pickett.
George Pickett, thank you. I don't think that is any indication of their ability on the field of battle, because both men served pretty well throughout their 4 years of service, but their ranking was rather low compared to some other generals whose ranking was rather high, but you never heard of them again. So it just kind of shows you that sometimes the scholastics of it was not as important as the military aspects of the training. Well, on March the 4th, Colonel Maxey received his General Star, and he left the regiment never again to see the bulk of his regiment. The story goes that after receiving his General Star, he came into Corinth to tell the men goodbye, and upon arrival, all he found was just a few sick and broken down men, and he just had to tell them goodbye to tell the rest of the regiment. So he was off on his own command, and at that point, Maxey had left the regiment. Well, the original organization of the 9th Texas Infantry had Colonel Maxey commanding the regiment and Lieutenant Colonel Beeson, William Beeson, who was a Methodist minister who had helped to found Trinity University. I thought that was very interesting. And the major was a man named Wright Stanley, and he was from, I believe, from Bonham or Fannin. And I'm still looking. I'm trying to get some more good information on Wright Stanley. And we'll talk a little bit more about Colonel Stanley here in just a minute. But when Maxey received his promotion, a man from Scotland by the name of James Burnett was promoted to the rank of major, but he would not be around very long. Major Burnett was later detached, and he came back here to Lamar County to organize what would be known as Burnett's 1st Texas Sharpshooter Battalion, which he would command for the rest of the war. Well, Major Stanley's promotion didn't last very long. He was with the regiment as colonel about 2 months. He served through the regiment's first battle. But writing years after the war, the quartermaster of the 9th Texas, Thomas Skidmore, said that Major Stanley had been elected colonel of the regiment, but the boys so nearly plagued him out of his life that he would not have them. So he's in the Army a short time, and he saw how all these 18 and 19 and 20-year-old boys would treat an older man, and he decided that fighting was for the younger men, and he'd go back to civilian life. On March the 19th, the regiment left Iuka by rail and arrived at Corinth the next day. Here they were put into a very nice camp about a mile east of town, which all the men appreciated. It was on a good level area, which was very important when you had a lot of men, because it drained real well. But they weren't there but about a week, and they sent them over west of town about a mile and put them on a swamp where the health got, it went from bad to worse. And here many more of the men died. One of the men said, "The water here is very bad, the ground low and swampy, the health of the command during the month very bad, and the average loss from disease being 2 men per day since the first day of the month," meaning 2 men per day were dying there. In a letter written to his wife Susan, Jesse Bates of Hopkins County, Texas, said, "There's about 100,000 men here and near here. We are expecting a battle every day. Our regiment is still in very bad health." Colonel Stanley said, "It is impossible for us to pay attention to battalion and company drill necessary to achieve the level of efficiency desired. There is good discipline, however, the military appearance and discipline, or the military appearance is very inferior." These men had, from when they first began drilling in Lamar County here, they had taken a step backwards, and mostly it was due to the sickness that was prevalent in the regiment. When able to drill, the 9th Texas probably presented a very martial, if not uniform, appearance. They were armed with a variety of small arms, including mostly double-barreled shotguns, sportsman's rifles, and muskets, which Colonel Stanley noted that many of them were in very bad order. Well, sick and poorly drilled and without good weapons, the 9th Texas was about to go to the field of Shiloh and face the dreaded foe for the very first time. On March the 26th, at Corinth, Mississippi, the 9th Texas was placed in General J. Patton Anderson's brigade, which included the 17th and 20th Louisiana, the 1st Florida Battalion, the Confederate Guards Response Battalion, and the Washington, Louisiana Artillery 5th Company. So mostly Louisianans would be the Texans' companions of their first battle at Shiloh. Due to the prevalent sickness and also 2 companies being detached to guard a bridge, the 9th Texas went to their very first battle. Remember now, we were talking about 1,000 men. They go to their very first battle with only 226 men available for duty. The 9th Texas brigade that they were in, J. Patton Anderson's brigade, was placed in Bragg's Army Corps. The way that the Battle of Shiloh started out, you had General Hardee with the first line of Confederates attacking the Union camps, and it's often, or so the old romantic story goes, that the Confederates caught them sleeping in the camps. Whether or not that's entirely true, I'm not really sure, but they did surprise them a great deal. I know that one colonel went to William Tecumseh Sherman, who was a division commander there, and said, "General, there's the enemy right in my front." And Sherman said, "Well, you can take yourself and your blank and blank regiment back to Ohio. There's no Confederates nearer than Corinth to here." Well, they showed how near they were at 5 a.m. on April the 6th. Hardee's men came out of the woods and routed the enemy out of their camps, took a lot of artillery, and about 6 a.m., Bragg's Army Corps was ordered into the action, containing, of course, the 9th Texas Infantry. Bragg's Corps went in, and by then the Union lines had stabilized so that they had brought up all their artillery, and they were holding their position mainly with artillery and infantry support. These men had to be rooted out and had to be driven out with the bayonet. Colonel Stanley noted in his official report, "On the morning of the 6th, we advanced in line of battle under a heavy fire of artillery and musketry from the enemy's first encampment. Being ordered to charge the battery with our bayonets, we made 2 successive attempts, but finding, as well as our comrades in arms on the right and the left, it was almost impossible to withstand the heavy fire directed at our ranks. We were compelled to withdraw for a short time with considerable loss." He noted that the Washington artillery, with their well-directed fire, were able to silence the enemy's batteries. And in this battle, the Washington artillery began a well-deserved, their first battle was very good and helped to sustain the great reputation that the Washington artillery had, even through World War II, as a great artillery unit. The 9th Texas at this point charged and routed the enemy from their first encampment and continued a forward double-quick march until passing through 2 other encampments of the enemy, where we found our troops again heavily engaged with the 2nd Battery and its supports to the galling fire of which my regiment was openly exposed. The 9th Texas was finding as many other Confederates that battle against these Yankees, who they thought previously would be an easy foe, would be much more difficult than they originally had imagined. Well, it was here at this second line of works that Colonel Stanley's horse was shot out from underneath him, and several men in the regiment were killed and wounded. But the 9th Texas was ordered forward to charge and routed the 2nd Battery and captured all the supports. They were ordered at that point to the right, or to go around the enemy's left, close to the Tennessee River. However, it became dark at that point, ending the day's action. On the morning of the 7th, the Union Army was reinforced during the night by Buell's command from across the Tennessee River. And the way this battle ends is you hear a lot of things historically said about Shiloh that both sides had claimed victory. While it's true on April the 6th that the Confederates had assaulted and driven back the Yankees, on April 7th the Yankees were able to reclaim all their lost ground and basically held the same position as they held on the previous morning, the previous day's morning. We find from Shiloh that the Union Army, which to that point had basically done whatever they wanted to up and down the Mississippi River, taking Fort Donelson, Fort Henry, Island Number 10. They had taken the city of Nashville. We find that the war was practically over in the West, and Shiloh proved to the Yankees that Indeed, the Confederate soldiers, when they were dug in, they would fight, and they would be a ferocious opponent. The Union Army had been battered but not broken. Tanner of Company A, he was a wagon master during this whole time, and he had a chance to look over some of what had transpired that previous day. He noted the capture of General Benjamin Prentice's entire Union division, or what was left of it, about 3,000 soldiers, who he said, "We met General Prentice's 3,000 captured Union soldiers, all uniformed in blue, and I think the finest body of men that I ever saw." That's his comment on those Union soldiers. He also noted several other casualties of war. The dead lay upon the field of strife. The wounded filled the hospitals and all the tents, and scores upon scores lay stretched upon the bare ground with upturned faces, the rain coming down in a steady downpour. So they couldn't even get many of the wounded off the field. Well, the 9th Texas went into Shiloh, as I said, with 226 officers and men. They lost 14 killed, 42 wounded, and 11 captured or missing, for losses well over 25%, more than a quarter of what they took into the battle. Captain Dixon was killed in battle outright, and Captain Moore died of his wound on April 11th. But you can say, though, that the 9th Texas, their first battle, had been a success. The men had behaved very well. They had won some fame and some glory by taking all this artillery, which allowed other units to get into the battle and to give them a chance to become engaged with the enemy. Well, following the battle, the Confederate Army retreated down one road over which they had marched to the battlefield, back to Corinth, Mississippi. Here on May the 8th of 1862, the Confederate armies were all totally reorganized. At this point of the war, recruiting had almost virtually stopped. The recruits were no longer coming into the centers to be enlisted in Confederate service, and Richmond became very concerned that the war would basically be over unless they got more men into the army. The Conscription Act was passed in Richmond, which basically said that all able-bodied men between the ages of 18 and 35 must serve in the Confederate armies. The Conscription Act allowed a man out of duty for one of two reasons: if he was under 18, over 35, or if he owned over 20 slaves. So at this point in the war for many of the Southern patriots became a war of a rich man's war and a poor man's fight. They couldn't understand why this aspect was being put into the fight. So many of them at that point, who considered themselves marching side by side with George Washington at Valley Forge as a patriot of their nation, the war became a bitter thing to them. Following the regiment's reorganization, a new colonel was named. As Colonel Stanley indicated, he wasn't willing to serve anymore. Colonel William Q. Young from Grayson County was elected colonel. Colonel Young was only 24 years old when he was elected colonel in the Confederate Army. So he was a very, very young man. The new lieutenant colonel was Miles Dillard from here in Lamar County. And Dillard was, I believe, in almost 40 when he was made lieutenant colonel. So he was at the other end of the age spectrum. And the major was still James Burnett, but he would not, as I said, be here much longer. Well, the 9th Texas remained at Camp Texas near Tupelo, Mississippi for the months of May to July, where Colonel Young noted that the health of the regiment was good and the arms of the regiment were finally in good order. Jesse Bates, writing to his wife, said that the health of the regiment is better than it has been in a long time. He wrote again a few days later on July the 11th and said, "We expect to leave here in a few days, but we don't know where we're going. Some think that we're going to be ordered into Tennessee." For many of the Confederates, they did not want to stay in the swamps of Mississippi. They wanted to go forward where the enemy was and meet the enemy again and prove their worth on the field of battle. It was very important to them that they go back into the field immediately and face the enemy to show them that they were not afraid to fight. Well, the rumor mill had been correct. In July of 1862, the 9th Texas traveled by train and steamer to Chattanooga, Tennessee, where they went into camp just above Bridgeport on the Tennessee River. The Army was now under the command of General Braxton Bragg, and Bragg took the Army on its march into Kentucky to try to retrieve recruits and supplies from the fertile areas of Kentucky. On August the 15th, Ordnance Sergeant Ben Milam sent in a requisition for 400 of these rifles here. I brought a copy, and there's another one up here on the table. I brought an infield rifle musket. This weapon would shoot a 58 caliber infield ball, or what we call a mini ball, and it's a rifled musket, meaning that you can pretty well hit what you shoot at with one of these for up to several hundred yards away. Prior to that time, Ben Milam said we only have 25 of these weapons. He felt that if they could get the rifled musket, the men's morale would greatly improve because they no longer have to shoot at everything with buck and ball or with smoothbore weapons, which may not hit what you're aiming at as well. He stated that much benefit will accrue to the service by putting in the hands of the men superior rifles instead of the very inferior ones that they now have. They didn't receive the infield, but they did receive 360 of the Belgian rifled muskets, which were somewhat similar, but a much shorter musket, hence they didn't have as much range as the infield rifle would have. Well, the 9th Texas was now in Cheatham's Tennessee Division on its raid into Kentucky, and they were at the Battle of Perryville but were not actively engaged. The Battle of Perryville was referred to as one Confederate in the 1st Tennessee as a dog draw. He said both sides were whipped and neither one knew it. But the 9th Texas was basically in support of the artillery units, and they had one man killed, and that was Captain John Lane of Company G. Following the Battle of Perryville, Bragg retreated back through Cumberland Gap into Tennessee, where his army encamped near Tullahoma. They were not inactive very long, as later that month they were sent to the vicinity of Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Jesse Bates said, "We came here about 2 weeks ago from Tullahoma. There is but 2 regiments here, but I expect our regiment will stay here all winter." He also said regarding what they were eating at the time, he said, "We're eating mostly meat and bread. We can occasionally buy potatoes and dried fruit at the regimental commissary." So it doesn't sound like they were eating too bad. Well, at the Battle of Murfreesboro, this would be the 9th Texas' most severe test of the war. They lost more men here than in any other battle. They were placed in, as I said, General Benjamin Franklin Cheatham's Tennessee Division. And from what I've been able to gather, this was a great honor because Frank Cheatham's Tennessee Division contained all Tennessee regiments except for the 9th Texas. I thought that was very interesting. The brigade that they were in was under Colonel A.J. Vaughn and contained the 12th, 13th, 29th, 47th, and the 154th Tennessee, Scott's Tennessee Battery, and Allen Sharpshooters, along with the 9th Texas. The Battle of Murfreesboro opened up pretty much like the Battle of Shiloh did. General Bragg got the jump, this time on General William Rosecrans, and attacked him almost at daylight. The way one of the Union soldiers said it, he said, "We woke up that morning to a strange sight. Not 250 yards in our immediate front were thousands of armed Confederates." So Bragg apparently had the jump on the Yankee Army again. The 9th Texas participated in the attack which drove the Union Army from the field for the first day. Regarding their participation in the battle, Quartermaster Thomas H. Skidmore wrote that General Cheatham rode up to Colonel Dillard and ordered him with the regiment to take a battery which was being planted on a hill not far distant. Colonel D. expostulated and said there was not a cartridge left in the regiment, to which General C. responded with his characteristic oath and style that it made no difference that the regiment would take the battery with Barlow knives if they were ordered to do so. And at that point they charged and they brought the battery in. Lieutenant Colonel Miles Dillard wrote back to the Clarksville Standard newspaper on the 9th's participation at Murfreesboro. "The boys of the old 9th Texas can never be too highly appreciated for their cool and undaunted bravery on the bloody battlefield of Murfreesboro, for never did soldiers acquit themselves with more honor than they did on that day." Praise also came from high-ranking officers outside of the regiment. In addition to Colonel Vaughn, General Cheatham spoke very highly of the 9th Texas. He said that the 9th Texas Regiment, under the command of that gallant officer, Colonel William Hugh Young, they did not hear the orders to withdraw and became detached from the command and drifted farther to the left, where they remained in the woods and continued to fight, but at last charged the enemy on their flank and drove them from the woods on their entire flank, losing very heavily. Colonel Young was shot in the shoulder and disabled, and he had 2 horses shot out from underneath him. If you take a look at your handout there, and you look down at that list of battles that the 9th Texas fought in, you'll see that time and time again, Colonel Young was shot in action. If there was ever a man that was wounded more in the entire Army than Colonel Young, I don't think history has recorded him yet. We know that he was wounded at least 7 times, and despite this, Colonel Young lived to the age of 63, which not too bad for a man that's been wounded 7 times and lost a foot during the war. Well, the Battle of the 31st, just like Shiloh, has been a complete success for the Confederate Army at Murfreesboro. On January the 1st, both armies stayed on the field, but they did not go into battle against each other. And finally, on January the 2nd, Bragg mounted an assault against the Union right, which failed miserably, and the Army withdrew and fell back to Shelbyville, Tennessee. It was here on January 21st that the 9th Texas Infantry were taken out of Cheatham's Tennessee Division and reassigned to General Matthew Duncan Ecker's Texas Brigade, which at that time contained the 10th, the 14th, and the 32nd Texas Dismounted Cavalry Regiments, and also Douglas's Texas Battery. It would be in General Ecker's brigade that the 9th Texas would remain for the remainder of the war. They stayed around Shelbyville till May of 1863, at which time they were ordered to Jackson, Mississippi. It was here that General Joe Johnson was trying to raise a large enough force to lift the siege of Vicksburg and bring out the 30,000 men there and unite them with the other men that he had managed to gather, and have an army big enough that they could face Grant on something like equal terms in the field and beat Grant and make him fall back. However, on July the 4th, we know that Vicksburg fell in the west, and Lee's army retreated from Gettysburg in the east, which you would think would end the whole war. Not so, because the war would go on for another almost 2 full years after that point. In late August, Ecker's Texas Brigade was ordered to the area around Chickamauga Battlefield now. We know that they were the first brigade to cross Crawfish Springs. It was there that the famous Confederate cavalry general Nathan Bedford Forrest took Ecker's brigade and also Walker's other small brigade under General Claudius Wilson, the Georgia Brigade, and forced them into the Battle of Chickamauga, becoming the first Confederate units on the scene. Once again, just like Shiloh and Murfreesboro, the 9th Texas ran up against artillery, which once again they captured the artillery that they were ordered to take. We don't find them finishing many battles, but they certainly know how to begin a battle and help the other men to get on the field and to assist in opening up the battle. Well, Lieutenant Stephen Tanner of Company A noted that the picket line of the 9th Texas was all captured, except for himself. He was the only one to escape. One of the men on the picket line was Lieutenant George Bedford of Lamar County. Lieutenant Bedford, he managed to live through the war, but the last 20 months of it he lived in Camp Douglas, Illinois, as a prisoner of war. After the war, though, he came back here and he read law, and then he read medicine. He went to Tulane University and graduated, and he was a very well-known and well-respected doctor here in Lamar County until his death at the age of 79. Regarding the part played by Ecker's brigade in the Battle of Chickamauga, Major General William Henry Talbot Walker said that I have no report from General Ector, but his brigade acted with the greatest gallantry. We know that the 9th Texas in this battle numbered 145 men, a very small regiment. But after their severe bloodletting at Shiloh and then Murfreesboro, the 9th Texas would never again have more than 200 men available for any battle that they were engaged in. They lost 6 killed, 36 wounded, and 18 men were captured at Chickamauga. Following the battle, they were ordered back to Jackson, Mississippi, where they remained for the next several months. The brigade had been so beat up at Chickamauga that they had to rest and refit and get more men back into the ranks. It was here at at Demopolis, Alabama, that they were placed into a new division, which was just then being organized under a general by the name of Samuel French. Now, General French had been born in New Jersey. He was a northerner by birth, but he was a southerner at heart. And he loved his Texans, his Missourians, and his Mississippians that he commanded for the remaining 1 year of the war. In February of 1864, General Leonidas Polk's Corps had a grand review at Demopolis. This was complete with bands, and crowds were lining the streets and the hillsides watching the action as each regiment after regiment passed before the general in the grand review. It is a wonderful scene. At the front of the procession was General Loring's uniform, and they were all wearing brand new bright Confederate gray uniforms and had brand new battle flags. Well, behind them came General Francis Marion Cockrell's Missouri troops and General Claudius W. Sears' Mississippi troops. And they, just as Loring's division, were wearing brand new uniforms and had sparkling, spanking bright new flags. Well, bringing up the rear were Ector's Chubs, as they were known. And as the Texans marched by, clean but ragged and wearing their old worn-out uniforms and their old shot-torn colors, one female observer looked at them and said, "Ha! Look at that old tattered rag that regiment carries for a banner. Would you not be ashamed to follow it?" Well, Thomas Skidmore heard the remark, and he turned to her, and he noted that the man carrying the flag was Festus Connor, who had carried it through every engagement they had been through thus far in the war, and had never been wounded. But he looked at the flag and said, "Ma'am, wherever those beautiful colors have gone before, these men could tell the same tale of blood and carnage, and all that goes to prove the noble and daring of his followers today. Then will these men be more proud than they are right now," meaning for the remaining history of the war. I guess she thought about it and didn't really have a reply for him, but it became more real to her, the sacrifice that these men had made, when she thought about why those colors were so ragged and torn. Well, as the Texans passed General Polk and his staff, Skidmore said that the Texans raised the Texas yell as loud as they had ever yelled, and General Polk raised his cap to the men, and he yelled back as lustily as any of them. And at that point, Skidmore turned back to the wagon, or back to the woman, and said, "Ma'am, General Polk has not given any other flag a tenth of respect that he gave that old tattered rag." So he had the last word on the woman. An interesting note on this grand passing review at Demopolis, Alabama. The three men involved in this story here, or the four men actually, General French, of course, was born in New Jersey, and Lieutenant Colonel Dillard, who commanded the 9th Texas at that time, was born in Illinois. Quartermaster Thomas Skidmore was born in Cadiz, Ohio, and Festus O'Connor had been born in Indiana. So you tell me it was a Southerner's war. These men came from all over the United States to fight in the 9th Texas. Well, after the grand review at Demopolis on April 6th, Jesse Bates of Company G noted that the boys have all re-enlisted and are all in good spirits. So the boys of the 9th Texas at that point, those that survived the battles, the sickness, the hospitals, the poor pay, the poor food, they decided it was worthwhile to fight for what they deemed as their independence. And by almost unanimous consent, they all enlisted in the 9th Texas for the rest of the war, whenever that would be.